The deep space mining vessel Aurora drifted silently through the asteroid field near Kepler 438, its crew focused on extracting rare minerals from the floating rocks. Nobody expected to find anything more exciting than platinum deposits. That changed when Chief Engineer Emma Foster noticed strange energy readings coming from the largest asteroid. "David, you need to see this," she called to Commander David Torres, who was reviewing supply manifests in the ship's cramped control room. The readings showed artificial structures buried deep inside the asteroid. After 3 days of careful excavation, they found something that would change everything. A massive alien facility, dormant but clearly advanced beyond human technology. The Discovery team included Captain Maria Santos, who commanded the escort frigate Defiance, and Dr. Robert Kim, the mission's xenoarchaeologist. As they explored the facility, they found star maps, technology blueprints, and what appeared to be historical records. The most disturbing discovery was a series of warnings about something called the Great Consuming and references to fleeing from their homeworld. 3 weeks later, while the human team was still studying the alien facility, space around them suddenly filled with massive warships. The vessels were sleek and predatory, covered in armor that seemed to absorb light itself. They moved with perfect coordination, forming attack formations that spoke of military discipline refined over centuries. The lead alien ship transmitted a message in perfectly translated human language. The voice was cold and mechanical. "Inferior species, you have violated sacred Vraxi territory and defiled the memorial of the fallen. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Commander Torres tried to explain their peaceful intentions, but the alien response was swift and brutal. "Chaos spawn cannot be reasoned with. You will be contained or eliminated." The first battle was a massacre. Human weapons barely scratched the alien shields, while their energy beams cut through human armor like paper. The mining ship Aurora lasted less than 10 minutes before its reactor went critical. Captain Santos managed to evacuate most of the crew to her ship before the explosion, but the Defiance was badly damaged and vastly outgunned. What happened next surprised everyone, including the aliens. Instead of fleeing or surrendering the human survivors began fighting with desperate creativity. They used the asteroid field as cover, rigged mining explosives as weapons, and coordinated their attacks in ways that seemed random but somehow worked. Dr. Kim found himself manning a weapon station using his knowledge of the alien facility to predict weak points in their technology. Emma Foster jury-rigged the ship's mining lasers into makeshift weapons that could actually damage alien shields. Even injured crew members found ways to contribute, turning their medical knowledge into tactical advantages. The alien commander, Admiral Kethvar, watched the battle with growing confusion. His tactical computers couldn't predict human movements because they followed no logical pattern. Humans would sacrifice valuable equipment to save a single crew member, then risk multiple lives to retrieve seemingly worthless personal items. They fought like no species he had ever encountered. The turning point came when Captain Santos made an impossible decision. Her ship was dying, its reactor failing, but she could still save the civilian researchers if she rammed the lead alien vessel. The impact wouldn't destroy the massive enemy ship, but it would give the others time to escape. "Tell Earth what we found here," she transmitted to the surviving ships. "Tell them we're not alone, and we're not helpless." The collision sent shockwaves through both fleets. The alien ship survived, but was badly damaged. More importantly, Admiral Kethvar couldn't understand what he had witnessed. In Vraxi society, higher castes were preserved at the cost of lower castes. The idea of a ship captain sacrificing herself for mere researchers violated every principle of their civilization. The surviving human ships managed to escape, carrying warnings and data about their new enemies. But they also carried something else, proof that humans could fight back against impossible odds. In the weeks that followed, both sides prepared for war. The Vraxvi High Command reviewed the battle recordings with growing alarm. These chaos-spawn humans didn't follow predictable patterns. They adapted too quickly, improvised too effectively, and showed disturbing levels of individual initiative. Sub-Commander Veltar, who had observed the battle from a secondary vessel, found himself thinking about the human captain's sacrifice. In Vraxi society, such an act would be considered mental illness, but somehow it had been effective. The humans had achieved their primary objective despite being completely outmatched. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the news of first contact spread, panic and determination in equal measure. Humanity wasn't ready for interstellar war, but they had no choice. The aliens had made their intentions clear. Humans were seen as a threat to be eliminated. Admiral Lisa Chen was put in charge of Earth's defense preparations. She studied every second of the battle footage, looking for advantages. What she found gave her hope. The aliens were powerful but predictable. They followed rigid tactics and seemed unable to adapt quickly to changing situations. "They fight like a machine," she told the Joint Chiefs. "Perfect coordination, overwhelming firepower, but no creativity. That's going to be their weakness." The war officially began when a Vraxi fleet entered the Sol system, broadcasting surrender demands to Earth. The response was simple: come and take it. What followed was 3 days of desperate fighting around Mars and the asteroid belt. Human forces were outnumbered 10-1, but they used every advantage they could find. Civilian ships became improvised weapons. Mining stations turned into fortress outposts. Even children helped by calculating trajectories and monitoring communications. The Vraxi won the battle but paid a price they hadn't expected. For every human ship destroyed, they lost equipment, time, and personnel. Worse, they began to see disturbing changes in their own lower castes. Engineers began suggesting tactical modifications without permission. Workers started questioning orders that seemed inefficient. The human chaos was spreading. Admiral Kethvar reported to the High Command that humanity represented a new kind of threat. They weren't just another species to be conquered. They were an idea that could undermine the entire Vraxi social structure. The response was immediate and terrifying. Classify humans as Class 9 extinction threat. Begin total war protocols. This species must be eliminated before their madness spreads further. But as Kethvar prepared for the next phase of the war, he couldn't stop thinking about that human captain and her impossible sacrifice. Something deep in his warrior's heart whispered that perhaps madness and courage were not so different after all. Lieutenant Commander Alex Reed never expected to be famous, especially not among an alien species trying to kill him. But 6 months into the war, his name appeared in Vraxi tactical databases as a high-priority chaos agent, whose elimination was worth sacrificing entire squadrons. The label came from the Battle of Titan Station, where Reed's small patrol of 3 human destroyers encountered a Vraxi battle group of 12 ships. Standard military doctrine said retreat was the only option. Reed's response was to split his tiny force and attack from 3 different directions simultaneously, using Titan's methane clouds as cover. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, 7 Vraxi ships were disabled or destroyed, and Reed's battered squadron limped away with critical intelligence about enemy supply routes. The Vraxi fleet commander submitted a report that became required reading in their war college. Human forces display tactical unpredictability that renders standard combat algorithms ineffective. What the report didn't mention was the growing unease among Vraxi crews. They had been taught that inferior species would flee or surrender when faced with superior firepower. Instead, humans seemed to get more dangerous when cornered. They fought harder when losing, not softer. Sub-Commander Veltar experienced this firsthand during the assault on Europa Mining Complex. His assault ship was part of a coordinated attack on the facility, which intelligence said was defended by civilian mining equipment and a handful of security guards. Instead, they found themselves fighting a fortress. The humans had turned mining lasers into artillery, converted ore haulers into mobile bunkers, and rigged the entire facility with explosives. Worse, They refused to surrender even when facing certain death. Medical Officer Dr. Patricia Brown continued treating wounded defenders while under fire, then picked up a weapon when the medics were overrun. Why don't they follow proper surrender protocols? Veltar asked his communications officer after the third human position chose self-destruction over capture. The officer, a lower caste Vraxi named Zethal, hesitated before answering. Perhaps, Commander, they have reasons we don't understand. That response would have earned punishment before the war began. Now, Veltar found himself wondering the same thing. The turning point for many Vraxi soldiers came during what humans called the Mercy Run, a civilian transport carrying evacuees from a bombed colony suffered engine failure in contested space. The ship held no military value and posed no threat, but it carried 3,000 humans, including many children. Commander Emma Foster, now leading a human rescue squadron, received the distress call while engaged in a running battle with Vraxi forces. Standard procedure said to abandon the civilians and focus on military objectives. Instead, Foster ordered her entire squadron to break off their attack and protect the transport. Vraxi Admiral Kethvar watched the battle from his command ship, expecting the humans to abandon the defenseless vessel when faced with superior firepower. Instead, human warships formed a protective screen around the transport and fought with desperate fury to keep it safe. The battle cost the humans dearly. 2 destroyers were destroyed, and Foster's flagship was left crippled. But the civilian transport escaped with all hands. What shocked Kethavar was what came next. Human medics who had stayed behind began treating wounded Vraxi prisoners with the same care they gave their own soldiers. Medical technician Tom Walsh worked for 18 hours straight, saving the lives of enemy soldiers who had been trying to kill him minutes earlier. When asked why, his answer was simple. They're hurt. That's all that matters. This behavior violated every principle of Vraxi military doctrine. Enemies were to be eliminated, or enslaved, not healed. The idea of treating captives as equals was not just foreign, but dangerous. It suggested that caste distinctions might be artificial rather than natural law. Engineer caste member Zethal found himself questioning everything he had been taught when he analyzed captured human technology. Human ships were crewed by Vraxi standards, but they were modified and improved in ways that shouldn't work. Every vessel was unique, customized by its crew to match their specific needs and fighting style. "Look at this weapon mounting," he told his supervisor, pointing to a human gun turret that had been jury-rigged to rotate faster than its original design allowed. The humans have bypassed 3 safety systems and added cooling mechanisms that aren't in any manual. It should explode after 10 shots, but somehow it works better than our standard weapons. His supervisor, bound by rigid engineering protocols, dismissed the modifications as chaotic tampering. But Zethal couldn't stop thinking about the ingenuity required to make such improvements. In Vraxi society, only engineer caste members were allowed to modify technology, and only according to approved procedures. Humans seemed to expect everyone to be an engineer. The implications were disturbing. If lower castes could innovate and improve existing designs, what did that say about the Vraxi system that kept them from trying? These questions became widespread as the war continued. Vraxi soldiers began noticing that human forces didn't follow strict hierarchies. They saw enlisted personnel making tactical suggestions to officers, civilian engineers working alongside military planners, and medical staff who treated everyone regardless of rank or species. Most disturbing of all, they began to see lower caste, Vraxi asking why their own society couldn't work the same way. The crisis came to a head during the siege of New Geneva Colony. The human defenders had held out for 3 months against overwhelming odds, using tactics that made no sense according to Vraxi military theory. They rotated leadership based on expertise rather than rank, allowed civilians to contribute to military planning, and somehow maintained morale despite facing certain defeat. Admiral Kethvar arrived to oversee the final assault personally, but what he found changed him forever. The human defenders sent a message offering to share their medical supplies with wounded Vraxi soldiers, asking only for a temporary ceasefire to treat the injured on both sides. The offer was militarily insane. The humans had no reason to help their enemies and every reason to let them suffer. But Dr. Rachel Moore, the colony's chief medical officer, explained their position simply. Healing isn't about sides. It's about doing what's right. For the first time in his military career, Kethvar found himself questioning orders. The High Command wanted him to reject the offer and continue the assault. But looking at his own wounded soldiers, he couldn't understand why accepting help was considered weakness. The temporary ceasefire lasted 3 days. During that time, human and Vraxi medical teams worked side by side, sharing techniques and resources. Lower caste Vraxi medics found themselves treated as equals by human doctors who valued their skills over their social status. When the ceasefire ended, the battle resumed. But something had changed. Vraxi soldiers fought more reluctantly, and several lower caste officers began submitting suggestions for ending the conflict peacefully. These suggestions were quickly suppressed by the High Command, but the ideas continued to spread. The human chaos was proving to be contagious, and the Vraxi Empire was beginning to fracture under its influence. In his private quarters, Admiral Kethvar reviewed battle reports and casualty lists. The war was becoming more costly with each engagement, not because humans were becoming stronger, but because they were teaching the Vraxi to question everything they had believed about strength, duty, and the natural order of things. For the first time in centuries, the Vraxi Empire faced an enemy that could not be defeated through superior firepower alone. They were fighting an idea, and ideas were much harder to kill than ships. Engineer caste member Zethal had never spoken directly to a human before the accident at Kepler Station. The massive space station, built by the Vraxi as a forward operating base, suffered critical damage during a human raid. With repair crews dead or wounded, desperate circumstances forced the Vraxi to use human prisoners as technical assistants. Dr. Robert Kim, captured during the fall of his research station, found himself working alongside Zethal to prevent the station's reactor from going critical. The work required both species to share technical knowledge and coordinate their efforts in ways that violated every Vraxi protocol about maintaining caste boundaries. "Your fusion containment system is elegant," Kim observed as they rewired. "Damaged control circuits, but you could improve efficiency by 20% with variable magnetic field modulation." Zethal stopped working. In Vraxi society, only superior castes could suggest improvements to existing designs. For a prisoner to offer technical advice was unthinkable, but the human's suggestion was brilliant, solving a problem that had puzzled Vraxi engineers for decades. "Show me," Zethal said quietly, checking to make sure no warrior caste observers were watching. Over the next 12 hours, they worked together to save the station. Kim shared human engineering techniques, while Zethal explained Vraxi technology principles. By the time they finished, both had learned more about practical engineering than years of formal education had taught them. More importantly, Zethal experienced something no Vraxi had felt in centuries: intellectual equality. The human didn't treat him as an inferior caste member, but as a fellow engineer whose ideas had value. When they successfully restarted the reactor, Kim shook his hand and said, "Nice work, partner." The gesture seemed simple, but it shattered something fundamental in Zethal's worldview. If a prisoner could treat him as an equal, what did that say about the caste system that defined his entire existence? Similar questions were spreading throughout the Vraxi Empire. Warrior caste officer Veltar faced his own crisis during the evacuation of civilian populations from a contested system. Standard Vraxi protocol required protecting higher castes first, with lower castes evacuated only if resources permitted. But as Veltar watched human forces evacuating their own civilians, he saw something that challenged everything he believed about military priorities. Human Colonel Patricia Brown led a desperate rescue mission to save trapped civilians from a collapsing habitat module. Her team included soldiers, medics, and civilians working together without regard for rank or status. The mission succeeded. But what struck Veltar was the aftermath. No human authority decided who deserved rescue based on their social position. Instead, they saved everyone they could reach, treating a janitor's life as equal to a scientist's. When Veltar suggested implementing similar tactics to save more Vraxi civilians, his superior officer's response was swift and harsh. Lower castes exist to serve higher castes. Their sacrifice ensures the survival of those who matter. But watching human broadcasts of the rescue mission, Veltar couldn't escape the feeling that maybe everyone mattered. The real crisis began when lower caste Vraxi started organizing their own rescue operations, copying human tactics they had observed through intercepted communications. Worker caste members began coordinating evacuation efforts without waiting for warrior caste approval. Engineer caste personnel started making tactical suggestions based on human innovations they had studied. Most shocking of all, some lower caste Vraxi began questioning why they needed higher caste permission to save lives and solve problems. The first organized protest came from the manufacturing world of Vrax Prime, where worker caste members had been watching human broadcasts showing industrial workers contributing to military planning and technological development. A group of factory supervisors submitted a formal petition requesting permission to suggest improvements to weapons production. The petition was not just denied but treated as sedition. The supervisors were imprisoned, and their families were demoted to even lower caste positions. But the damage was done. The idea that lower castes could contribute meaningfully to society had taken root and was spreading faster than the high command could suppress it. Admiral Kethvar found himself caught between his loyalty to the Empire and his growing understanding that the humans might be right about the value of individual initiative. During the battle for the mining colonies, he watched human forces adapt their tactics in real time, with junior officers making strategic decisions that would require high command approval in Vraxi forces. The result was devastating. Human forces consistently outmaneuvered Vraxi fleets because they could respond to changing conditions faster than the rigid Vraxi command structure allowed. Kethvar began to realize that the Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. The breaking point came during what became known as the Petition Crisis, a coalition of lower caste Vraxi, inspired by human examples of democratic decision-making, submitted a formal request to the High Command asking for representation in military planning discussions. The petition was carefully worded and respectful, focusing on practical benefits rather than philosophical challenges to the caste system. The petitioners argued that including lower caste perspectives could improve military effectiveness and reduce casualties across all caste levels. The High Command's response was brutal and absolute. The petition's organizers were publicly executed, their families stripped of all caste status and exiled to prison worlds. The message was clear. The caste system was not open to debate or modification, but the executions backfired spectacularly. Instead of discouraging dissent, they created martyrs. Across the Empire, lower caste Vraxi began secretly organizing, sharing human broadcasts that showed alternative ways of organizing society. Zethal found himself at the center of one such group, composed of engineers and technicians who met in secret to discuss human innovations and their implications for Vraxi society. They called themselves the Order of Open Minds, and their goal was simple: prove that lower castes could contribute meaningfully to the Empire's success. Working in secret, they began implementing human-inspired modifications to Vraxi technology. Weapons became more efficient, ships became more maneuverable, and defensive systems became more effective. But when they tried to share their improvements officially, they were punished for exceeding their caste authority. The contradiction was becoming impossible to ignore. Lower caste innovations were improving Varaxi military effectiveness, but the caste system prevented those innovations from being implemented openly. The Empire was literally weakening itself to maintain social control. Commander Veltar experienced this contradiction personally when his ship's engineer caste crew developed modifications that could increase weapon range by 30%. The improvements worked perfectly in combat, giving his forces a significant advantage over human opponents. But when he reported the modifications to Fleet Command, the engineers were disciplined for unauthorized innovation. "We're punishing success," he told his trusted aide, Sub-Commander Nextar. "The humans are teaching our own people to be better, and we're stopping them." Nextar's response revealed how far the crisis had spread. "Perhaps, Commander, the humans are teaching us what we could have been all along." That conversation would have been treason a year earlier. Now it was becoming common throughout the Vraxi military. Officers at all levels were beginning to question whether the Empire's rigid structure was helping or hindering their war effort. The Isaito. Final straw came when Admiral Kethvar received a secret communication from a group of mid-level Varaxi officers requesting permission to open direct negotiations with human forces. They argued that the war was destroying both species and that the human example of cooperation and innovation offered a path toward peace. The request put Kethvar in an impossible position. Officially, he should report the officers for sedition and have them executed, but privately, he agreed with their assessment. The war was becoming unwinnable, not because of human military strength, but because of human ideas that were tearing the Empire apart from within. For the first time in his career, Admiral Kethvar decided to act without high command approval. He sent a carefully encrypted message to human diplomatic channels, requesting secret negotiations to discuss terms for ending the conflict. The message was simple but revolutionary. "We have learned from you. Now teach us how to make peace." The secret meeting took place in an abandoned asteroid mining facility in neutral space, far from both human and Vraxi patrol routes. Dr. Rachel Moore arrived aboard a modified civilian transport, while Admiral Kethvar came in an unmarked scout ship with minimal escort. Both sides knew they were risking everything on a desperate gamble for peace. The first hour was tense and awkward. Years of warfare had created deep mistrust between the species, and neither side knew how to begin conversations about ending a conflict that had cost millions of lives. But everything changed when Kethvar shared the real reason behind Vraxi aggression. "Your species reminds us of something we lost long ago," he explained, displaying holographic records from ancient Vraxi archives. "Millennia ago, our homeworld was consumed by the Devourers, a machine intelligence that destroys all organic life in its path. We survived only by becoming utterly disciplined, utterly controlled. Your chaos terrifies us because it reminds us of what we were before we learned to fear." Dr. Moore studied the records with growing alarm. The Devourers were unlike anything humanity had encountered. Vast machine fleets that systematically harvested entire star systems for raw materials while eliminating any biological competition. The ancient Varaxi had fought bravely but lost because their individualistic society couldn't coordinate an effective defense. "They're still out there," Kethvar continued. "Our long-range sensors have detected them moving through the outer rim, consuming everything in their path. They'll reach this region of space within 10 years, maybe less." The revelation changed everything. Both species faced extinction from an enemy that made their current war seem trivial by comparison. But more importantly, the human traits that terrified the Varaxi might be exactly what was needed to defeat the Devourers. "Your ancestors fought as individuals," Moore observed, studying the battle records. "They were brave, but uncoordinated. The Devourers overwhelmed them with superior organization and numbers." Kethvar nodded grimly. "We learned from that defeat. We became disciplined, unified, predictable. It helped us survive as refugees, but it also made us rigid. When we encountered your species, we saw the same chaos that had destroyed our homeworld. We thought we were preventing another catastrophe. But you were wrong, Moore said quietly. Our chaos isn't random, it's creative adaptation. We don't fight as individuals, we fight as individuals working together toward common goals. That's completely different from what your ancestors did. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. Two species that had been trying to exterminate each other began working together to prevent mutual extinction. The process was neither easy nor quick. Human Admiral Lisa Chen joined the talks, bringing military expertise and skepticism in equal measure. Many humans wanted revenge for Vraxi atrocities, while many Vraxi still believed that human chaos was inherently dangerous. Building trust required both sides to fundamentally change how they viewed their former enemies. The breakthrough came when engineer cast member Zeth Al, now serving as Kethvar's technical advisor, worked with human engineer Ben Rodriguez to solve a critical problem. Devourer technology used adaptive shielding that adjusted to counter any attack pattern. Traditional weapons became less effective the longer they were used against the same target. We need weapons that change faster than their shields can adapt, Rodriguez explained. But our technology isn't advanced enough to do it alone. Zethal studied the problem for hours before proposing something revolutionary. What if we combined human adaptability with Vraxi precision? Your people excel at improvisation, ours at perfection. Together, we might create something neither could achieve alone. Working together, they developed hybrid shield technology that used Varaxi power systems controlled by human adaptive algorithms. The result was a defense system that could literally learn from attacks and develop new countermeasures in real time. It was more effective than anything either species had built independently, but technology was only part of the solution. The real challenge was overcoming decades of hatred and mistrust. Both species had committed atrocities during the war, and many soldiers on both sides demanded justice before they would consider cooperation. The solution came from an unexpected source. Vraxi sub-commander Veltar, who had been deeply affected by human examples of mercy and equality. He proposed something that shocked both sides: joint tribunals where humans and Vraxi would judge war crimes together, with punishment and rehabilitation focused on preventing future conflicts rather than seeking revenge. Justice isn't about making the past right, he argued. It's about making the future better. The Devourers don't care about our grievances. They'll consume us all equally. The first joint operation was a disaster. Human and Varaxi forces had completely different command structures, communication protocols, and tactical doctrines. When they attempted to jointly defend a contested research station from Devourer scouts, confusion and mistrust nearly led to catastrophic failure. Captain Tom Walsh commanded the human contingent while Veltar led the Vraxi forces. Their first battle plan fell apart within minutes when human forces began adapting to changing conditions without informing their Vraxi allies, while Vraxi forces followed rigid protocols that made no sense to human observers. "This isn't working," Walsh reported to Admiral Chen. "We're fighting each other as much as we're fighting the Devourers." But instead of abandoning the alliance, both sides learned from their mistakes. Human officers began explaining their tactical reasoning to Vraxi counterparts, while Vraxi commanders started allowing human forces to implement rapid adaptations to battle plans. The second joint operation showed dramatic improvement. When Devourer forces attacked the mining colony of New Ceres, the combined human Vraxi defense force responded with unprecedented coordination. Human creativity provided tactical flexibility, while Vraxi discipline ensured perfect execution of complex maneuvers. Engineer Ben Rodriguez worked directly with Zethal to modify defensive systems in real time as Devourer forces adapted their attack patterns. Meanwhile, human medics and Vraxi healers worked side by side to treat casualties from both species without regard for past enmities. The battle was won, but the real victory was what happened afterward. Human and Vraxi soldiers who had been trying to kill each other months earlier now celebrated together, sharing stories and comparing experiences. The artificial barriers between the species began to dissolve as individuals formed genuine friendships across species lines. Admiral Kethvar watched the celebration with mixed emotions. The alliance was working, but it was also destroying the rigid caste system that had defined Vraxi society for millennia. Lower caste Vraxi were working as equals, with humans, making decisions and taking initiative that would have been impossible under the old system. "Are we saving our species or destroying it?" he asked Dr. Moore during a quiet moment. Her answer was simple but profound. "Maybe those are the same thing. Maybe what you're destroying was never worth saving, and what you're creating is what you were always meant to be." The transformation accelerated as more joint operations succeeded against Devourer scouts. Vraxi soldiers began adopting human practices of individual initiative and creative problem-solving, while humans learned Vraxi techniques of precision and coordination. The two species weren't just working together, they were evolving together into something entirely new, but the greatest test was still ahead. Long-range sensors detected the main Devourer fleet approaching, a massive armada that dwarfed anything either species had ever faced. The Alliance would need every advantage it could find to survive what was coming. Standing on the bridge of the first integrated human Vraxi warship, Admiral Chen and Admiral Kethvar watched the sensor readings with grim determination. They had forged an impossible alliance between former enemies, but now they had to prove it could stand against the greatest threat either species had ever faced. The war for survival was about to begin. The transformation was complete, but nobody fully understood it until the Althari arrived. 5 years had passed since the Alliance defeated the Devourer fleet, and the galaxy had changed in ways that seemed impossible before the war began. The rigid Vraxi Empire had evolved into the Vraxi Commonwealth, while humanity had learned the value of discipline and long-term planning from their former enemies. Commander Ben Rodriguez, now serving as Chief Technology Officer for the Integrated Fleet, was conducting routine patrol near the Outer Rim when his sensors detected something unexpected: a massive fleet of unknown ships moving at incredible speed toward inhabited systems. The vessels used technology that seemed even more advanced than Devourer machines, but these ships clearly carried living crews. "Admiral Veltar," Rodriguez transmitted to the Commonwealth flagship Redemption, "we've got company, and they're not here to chat." Admiral Veltar, once a proud Vraxi supremacist who now commanded the most diverse fleet in galactic history, studied the sensor readings with experienced eyes. The approaching ships moved with military precision, their formations suggesting aggressive intentions rather than peaceful contact. "All ships, prepare for first contact protocols," he ordered, "and get me Admiral Chen on priority channel." Admiral Lisa Chen commanded the human portion of the integrated fleet from her flagship Unity, a vessel that perfectly embodied the new alliance. Its crew included humans, Vraxi, and even some former Devourer machines that had been reprogrammed and integrated into the fleet after showing signs of developing individual consciousness. The first communication from the newcomers was transmitted in perfect human and Vraxi languages, suggesting they had been monitoring Alliance communications for some time. The message was coldly efficient. "Attention, primitive species. You are the Althari Imperial Fleet. Your chaotic expansion threatens galactic stability. Surrender immediately or face extermination." Dr. Rachel Moore, now serving as the Alliance's chief diplomat, tried to establish peaceful dialogue. But the Althari response revealed their true intentions. They viewed both humans and Vraxvi as dangerous anomalies that needed to be eliminated before their chaotic cooperation could spread to other species. "Your alliance violates natural order," the Althari commander declared. "Inferior species should serve superior ones. Your cooperation threatens the stability that advanced civilizations require for proper development." The Althari had watched the human-Vraxi war and its aftermath with growing alarm. They saw the alliance as a virus that could spread to other species, undermining the hierarchical systems that kept the galaxy orderly and predictable. Their solution was simple: destroy both species before their dangerous ideas could influence others. The first battle showed just how much both species had changed. When Althari forces attacked the research station at New Geneva, expecting to face the same chaotic human resistance they had observed during the original war, they instead encountered something entirely unprecedented. Human and Vraxi forces fought as a single coordinated entity, combining human creativity with Vraxi precision in ways that multiplied their effectiveness. Captain Tom Walsh, now commanding an integrated crew of both species, used tactics that borrowed from both traditions while creating something entirely new. "Vraxi Squadron, execute precision strike on their shield generators," he ordered. "Human squadrons, prepare for creative improvisation the moment their defenses are compromised." The combination was devastating. Vraxi forces created perfect openings that human forces exploited with unprecedented adaptability. When the Althari attempted to counter one tactic, the Alliance forces simply shifted to another approach without missing a beat. But what truly shocked the Althari was what happened when the battle turned against the Alliance. Instead of retreating or surrendering, the integrated forces began making the same impossible sacrifices that had once confused the Vraxi. But now, both species understood the power of such gestures. Engineer Zethal found himself commanding a critical defense platform when Althari forces broke through the outer perimeter. His position was hopeless, but retreat would leave civilian evacuation ships defenseless. Without hesitation, he ordered his mixed human-Vraxi crew to overload the station's reactor. "All ships, this is Zethal," he transmitted calmly. "We're going to buy you time to escape. Tell my people that I finally understand what honor really means." The explosion took out 3 Althari warships and gave the evacuation fleet the time they needed to reach safety. But more importantly, it showed the galaxy that the Alliance had created something genuinely new, a civilization where individuals of any species would sacrifice themselves for the greater good. The Althari commander reviewed the battle footage with growing unease. These weren't the chaotic humans or rigid Vraxi they had studied. This was something unprecedented, a fusion of different strengths that created capabilities neither species had possessed alone. "How do we fight an enemy that adapts faster than we can plan?" the Althari tactical officer asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. Several Althari lower caste members, inspired by intercepted Alliance broadcasts showing cooperation between different castes and species, began questioning their own society's rigid hierarchies. If humans and Vraxi could learn from each other, why couldn't different Althari castes do the same? The questions spread rapidly through Althari society, creating the same kind of social instability that had once threatened the Vraxi Empire. But unlike the Vraxi, the Althari High Command responded with even more brutal suppression, executing entire family lines to prevent the spread of cooperation disease. This response horrified many Alliance members, but it also revealed an important truth. The transformation that had saved both humans and Vraxi couldn't be forced on others. It had to be chosen freely, and some species might choose differently. Admiral Veltar faced this reality during the siege of Proxima Station. Althari ground forces had occupied the facility and were using civilian hostages to prevent Alliance attacks. Traditional military doctrine said to write off the hostages and destroy the station to prevent the Althari from using it as a base, but Veltar had learned too much from human examples to accept such calculations. Instead, he proposed something that would have been unthinkable during his days as a rigid Vraxi supremacist. A rescue mission that prioritized saving lives over achieving military objectives. "We're not going to become like them," he told his integrated command staff. "The moment we start calculating which lives matter more, we lose what makes us worth defending." The rescue mission succeeded, but only because human and Vraxi forces worked together with perfect coordination. Human engineers created distractions while Vraxi commandos executed precision strikes. Former enemies covered each other's backs and shared resources without hesitation. When the civilian hostages were freed, many were Althari non-combatants who had been abandoned by their own military. Instead of treating them as enemies, Alliance forces provided medical care and protection. Several Althari civilians asked to join the Alliance, abandoning their rigid society for the possibility of something better. The war's turning point came during the Battle of the Void Gate, where the main Althari fleet attempted to destroy the Alliance's primary shipyard. The facility was defended by integrated forces under the joint command of Admiral Chen and Admiral Kethvar, working together with a coordination that seemed telepathic. But the real surprise came when the battle began to turn against the Alliance. As Althari forces pressed their attack, something extraordinary happened. Vraxi ships began forming protective formations around human vessels, shielding them from enemy fire with their own hulls. Admiral Kethvar's flagship moved to protect a damaged human destroyer, taking massive damage in the process. When his bridge crew asked why he was risking their lives for humans, his answer echoed across the fleet. Because they taught us that some things are worth dying for, and some people are worth saving, regardless of which species they belong to. The gesture was returned moments later when human squadrons threw themselves between Althari attackers and crippled Vraxi vessels. The battle became a testament to how completely the Alliance had transformed both species. They weren't just fighting together, they were willing to die for each other. The Althari fleet was eventually defeated, but the real victory was the message broadcast across the galaxy. Admiral Veltar's words to the retreating Althari became legendary. You came here to destroy humanity because you feared their influence on us. You were right to be afraid. They taught us that strength comes not from domination, but from cooperation. Not from purity, but from diversity. And now we'll defend that truth against anyone who threatens it. In the years that followed, the Alliance became a beacon for species across the galaxy, seeking alternatives to rigid hierarchical systems. The human talent for adaptation and the Vraxi capacity for precision created a civilization that was both stable and dynamic, both ordered and free. Former engineer cast member Zeth Al, now serving as the Commonwealth's Chief Innovation Officer, worked with human scientists to develop technologies that neither species could have imagined alone. Their joint research stations became centers of learning where ideas mattered more than species or origin. The transformation was perhaps most visible in the Alliance military, where former enemies served side by side with complete trust. Human. Captain Emma Foster commanded Vraxi crew members who followed her orders without question, while Vraxi officers led human troops who valued their tactical expertise over their species' identity. But the greatest symbol of change was Admiral Veltar himself. Once a supremacist who viewed humans as chaotic, inferior beings, he had become their greatest defender. When new species threatened humanity, they found themselves facing not just human resistance, but Vraxi forces willing to fight to the death to protect their adopted family. The alien species that had once tried to eliminate humanity because they were dangerous had learned a profound truth. Humans were dangerous, but they were dangerous in the best possible way. They had the power to transform enemies into friends, oppressors into liberators, and rigid systems into something beautiful and alive. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, watching mixed crews of humans and Vraxi working together with perfect harmony, Admiral Veltar smiled. The chaos the Vraxi had once feared had indeed been contagious. It had infected them with hope, purpose, and the radical idea that every individual life had value regardless of species or status. The enemies had become guardians, and in defending humanity, they had discovered who they were always meant to be: free.